Our Bible study today is on 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for St. Paul and his message as he continues to speak to us through the centuries. We thank you, Lord, for the blessings of your Holy Spirit, who gives us the insights into your word. We pray that we would always be prepared for Christ's return, living our days in anticipation and as witnesses for Christ's return. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, well, just before this section and the end of chapter 4, Paul started talking about the coming of Jesus and what it was going to be like. I guess there were people in that church in Thessalonica who perhaps thought that if you died before Jesus returned, then maybe you missed out. There was a belief that Jesus would return within the lifetime of the apostles. We looked at the end of chapter 20 and 21 of John's Gospel, where it talked about how, Peter had looked at John and said, well, what about him? And because he had just predicted his own death, he talked about how Peter would die, he would be crucified, or he would die for being an apostle. And then Jesus turns to him and says, what is it to you if I return before he dies? He was talking about the fact that, he could return before the end of his life. And John did live to be in his 90s, but it didn't say that he would. It just says, what is it to you? And he even says, because of this, the apostles believed that, or the rumor went out that, Jesus would return. And so, obviously, as each of the apostles died because of their witness and their martyrdoms, that John was the last one left. And then I guess the idea that maybe Jesus would return in their lifetime became less and less secure. And then they started figuring out, well, we better do something about this. Because, Jesus rose in around 30 AD. He rose from the dead. And then the apostles didn't start writing. They started preaching, of course, but they didn't write the Gospels. I mean, Mark probably wrote his in maybe the late 50s, early 60s. And then Luke and Matthew wrote theirs in the mid 60s. And then John didn't write his gospel till 90. And so what was happening between 30 and almost 60? That's still 30 years. That's almost a generation. You can just imagine the disciples didn't write anything down because they thought, well, Jesus is returning. Let's get everybody ready. And then all of a sudden they start dying off, and it was getting, the apostolic age was ending, and people are saying, well, we better get ready for the long haul of preparing the world for Jesus. And so they had to start sharing the gospel and writing it down, really. And so the written gospels probably came as a response to the understanding that Jesus' return was probably not as soon as they thought it was. Okay, so Paul just talked about being ready, and that when Jesus returned, we'll all know it because we'll be caught up in the air with those who have passed away already. The people who died would be raised bodily in order for us to meet them in the air. And that's what the word rapture comes from. It's the Latin word for caught up. It doesn't necessarily mean to be, taken away from this world as if you're going to be disappeared and gone into heaven. It doesn't. Rapture has a different meaning than the Greek word that is used here to be caught up in the air. And it's just talking about a public event that everybody will see, because it talked about how the trumpet will blast, and the voice of the archangel, and the dead in Christ will rise first, and those who are still alive will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. I mean, I don't see what would be secret about this. So, if you know anything about the teaching of the rapture, it usually is based on pre-millennialist theology that takes some passages out of context. It uses a passage from Matthew where Jesus is talking about there'll be two people in a field. One will be taken, one will be left. And so that's where they get that left behind idea. I mean, but Jesus wasn't necessarily talking about, the rapture. He was just talking about the judgment day, or Jesus' return will be, it'll be like a thief in the night. It'll be sudden, right? And when he talks about one will be left and one will be taken, it doesn't necessarily say who's taken and who's not. It could be one is taken to punishment. It doesn't necessarily say one will be taken to heaven. So we don't necessarily know. He is talking about judgment in that context. But here, Paul is just talking about that it'll be something that we see with our eyes, and we'll hear with our ears, and we'll know it. And then he goes on in chapter 5 in this section. Originally there wasn't any verse numbers and chapter numbers. These were added later. So that he does say in verse 18 of chapter 4, encourage each other with these words, about that we'll be with the Lord forever. So the whole point of Jesus' return is not to instill fear in us, but it's really to encourage us. Jesus will return, and he'll take his people home to him in heaven. So it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Of course, if you don't know Jesus, then you'll be separated, as it says in Matthew 25, as the sheep are from the goats. So the understanding that people who don't believe in Jesus they won't have an opportunity to be in heaven is not because Jesus didn't invite them. It's because they refused the invitation. And Jesus gave us parables about that as well. So Judgment Day and the separation of the sheep and the goats is really a description of what happens when Jesus talked about the wedding, where there was a king who gave a feast and for the wedding of his son, and he sent out invitations, but the people of the town said, no, we've got better things to do, and they said no. And he even sent more people to say, the wedding feast is ready, please come, and they ignored him. And then so he sent out invitations and said, just bring in people from the streets. And so they brought other people into the wedding. And so that was that whole idea that those who were chosen were rejected because they refused to believe or come. And that's a parable about the Jews who were the chosen ones to come to God's people to go to heaven. But then when Jesus came, who was the bridegroom, and they were invited to the feast when Jesus rose from the dead, they rejected him, and as a result, they rejected the heavenly feast, the banquet. And so other people were invited, and that's the Gentiles, and that's us. The church has become a church of Gentiles because of the people who have received the invitation and have accepted it. But that parable goes on to talk about how the bridegroom's father, which is God, sees a man who's in the wedding feast and he doesn't have a robe on, because you don't go to a wedding wearing like old work clothes. You wear like nice clothes. And in the ancient world, the person who invited you actually provided for you. It was like they would give you a tuxedo. They wouldn't say, come to this beautiful wedding the way you are. They'd say, here's a tuxedo, or here's a wedding dress you can wear. In the ancient world, they wore a white robe, a very beautiful, clean piece of it was over the rest of your clothes. And so he sees a man without a wedding garment, and he says, how did you get in? And he throws him out, right? And that shows us that when it comes to heaven, you won't be in heaven by your own works, but by that which God provides to you. And Jesus is the one, it says in the book of Revelation, who covers us with his robe of righteousness. So it's not something that we come to heaven with saying, oh, look at how wonderful I am. No, we're covered with Jesus' righteousness that makes us beautiful and holy and white in God's sight. And then God welcomes us into the banquet because of what we have been given, and we wear the righteousness of Christ. Okay. Well, that's the background. And as I said in chapter 5 of 1 Thessalonians, he continues by saying, now, brothers, about times and dates, we do not need to write to you, for we know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Now, of course, he's quoting Jesus here. The word, the day of the Lord, is well documented in the Old Testament. Amos 5:18 talks about the day of the Lord, and usually it was called the day of Yahweh, right? So Yahweh is God, the Father, and the word Yahweh just means I am, so that's God's name. The day of the Lord was considered to be, the people of Israel thought of it as God coming to bring vengeance upon the enemies of God's people, right? But unfortunately, Amos was telling them that you were God's enemy because you were worshiping idols. The people of Israel were sinning. So the day, he says, the day of Yahweh, the day of the Lord, was a terrible day, according to Amos, because it was judgment day. Well, Jesus is also talked about, that the day of the Lord would be judgment. That's why he gave those different parables. But here, when he uses the phrase "the day of the Lord," Paul is he's talking about the suddenness of that day, when God comes back to intervene with judgments as well as blessings. In the New Testament, we see passages about this in other places. Let's look at Romans 2:5.
You got a couple coming.
Oh, some more people are coming? Okay. In Romans 2, verse 5, Paul talks about judgment. And he talks about the day of the Lord. He says, "But because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourselves for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed." So he's talking about, to the Romans, the letter of the Romans was kind of like an open letter. He hadn't visited that church, so it wasn't like a personal letter to people he knew. He was just answering basic questions of theology. I mean, some of the other letters, like 1 Corinthians and Thessalonians, he was writing about specific issues that he was asked about. And here in Romans, he's not. He's just, he's telling the people, this is what kind of things will happen if you live like this. So he didn't say that they were doing anything wrong in particular, but he talks, when in verse 5, and it says, "But because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant hearts," he's not saying that they were stubborn or unrepentant, but people who are stubborn and unrepentant, what are they doing? You might believe in Jesus, but if you refuse to change your life, if you're not repenting of your sin and turning away from it, that kind of stubbornness is storing up wrath for you. It's wrath that would be diverted, because on the cross Jesus took the wrath of God. He talked about in the Garden of Gethsemane where he took the cup of God's wrath and he drank it to the dregs. The dregs at the bottom of a glass of wine they're all bitter and it doesn't taste good. And so, you pour a glass of wine, you pour it all, the whole bottle, you get all the dregs, which is the kind of the sediment from and it doesn't taste good. It's really bitter. And if you drink a glass of wine, back in the ancient world, it would be served from wine skins, right? And the wine skin, it would be fermenting in there, and then it would have sediment in there. And when you pour it, you'd usually get some of it into your glass. And so you'd let the glass settle before you drank it. And you wouldn't drink
Good
it.
stuff is on the top.
That's right. You wouldn't drink the whole thing. But Jesus is talking about how God poured out his wrath upon humanity because of our sinfulness, and on the cross he would drink it to the dregs. That means he would take it all from us. So he was taking God's wrath completely away from us. And so on the day of judgment, we either have God's wrath poured out on Jesus, who took it for us, or because of our stubbornness and unrepentant hearts, we are rejecting Jesus' payment for our sins. That doesn't mean that he didn't pay for your sins. It just means that you refuse to accept the gift of Jesus' taking them away from you. It's like Jesus already gave all of us a check that says, paid in full, no hell, your sins are forgiven. And, if you get a check, if you don't cash it, then you don't receive the benefits of it. And so he's warning them about that. Don't live according to your own life or your own deeds. Don't depend on yourself. Depend on what Jesus has done for you. And so the wrath of God's judgment will be revealed on the last day. So he was just giving us the point, as well as from the Old Testament, that the day of the Lord is the day of judgment. And it's a bad thing if you have no faith in God or Jesus. And it's a good thing if you do, because if you do, then it's already been taken care of. So the other passage that is a good reference to this passage that we're looking at, 1 Thessalonians 5, is the one from 2 Peter. So let's turn to 2 Peter 2:9. Okay, so in 2 Peter 2:9, Peter writes, "If this is so," and he's talking about how Lot was tormented in his soul by the lawless deeds that he saw and heard in Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, "If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue godly men from trials and to hold the unrighteous for the day of judgment while continuing their punishment." So, he's talking about that, that when the day of judgment comes, that God will make things right. And those who are godly will be rescued from trials. And, of course, we live in a sinful world, so there always will be trials and suffering. I mean, we can't escape that. I mean, to be a Christian doesn't mean that you have no problems. It just means that you know that you have a perspective of those problems. They're only temporary, and God is in control. And then he says that God will hold the unrighteous for the day of judgment while continuing their punishment. So in a way, there is some kind of a punishment for them in this world. That's the kingdom of the right and the kingdom of the left. Luther talked about how the kingdom of the right is the church. It's the way that God rules in the hearts of his faithful. The kingdom of the left is the way he rules in the world through governments and law. Right? So one is the gospel. The church uses the gospel. The kingdom of the left uses the law, and that's governments. And so if you're evil, often you end up experiencing the consequences of your sin through punishment, right? If you murder somebody, you'll go to jail, most likely. There are people who get away with it, but not forever. Only in this world. You can only escape. And even if you do something wrong and maybe you don't get punished for it, a lot of times the only way you could not get punished for it is to live underground and trying to avoid people. It was a guy who kidnapped somebody and he was living in Montana for years and years, and he was living under the radar. But the minute if someone finds out about you, you get busted. So what kind of life is that, to live in hiding all your life just to avoid a punishment? So in a way, there's a punishment no matter what,
Well, you go probably always looking over your shoulder. And
if
the bomb going to drug.
Right, or people who change their names to try to avoid punishment. Maybe they. A lot of times it has to do with kidnapping your child after a divorce or something like that, and then they take the child away from the spouse. And there's this guy who applied to college, and they found out while he was applying to college that he had been kidnapped from his mother for the past 18 years, and he didn't know that he had a mother because the father had kidnapped this kid, and so the father went to jail. And he never knew who his mother was because his father raised him after kidnapping him and telling him, your mother's dead. And so he found his real mother, but it was just a kind of a shock because the only person he had ever known was now in jail. So, there is a type of punishment in this world, but the ultimate punishment comes for those who reject God on the day of judgment. So, back to 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul is not going into a lot of these details, things that Paul talked about in other places, although 1 Thessalonians may have been written earlier than Romans or Peter. But he says that it will happen like a thief in the night. And those are words that Jesus talked about, right? There's lots of ways of talking about about Judgment Day in the Bible. Sometimes it's called the Day of Redemption, which is from Ephesians 4:30. 2 Peter 3:12 talks about the day of God or the day of Christ in 1 Corinthians 1 verse 8. And then sometimes, and even in John's Gospel, chapter 6:39, it talks about the last day or the great day in Jude 6, or simply just called the day. It's the day of Christ's return. In 2 Thessalonians 1:10, it mentions just the day of judgment. And so, compared to other religions, Christianity and the Bible shows us that time is not cyclical. It doesn't just, there's no, being born, die, repeat. Born, die, repeat. Born, die, repeat. That cyclical idea of reincarnation is from the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and it's a man-made idea. It's not biblical. Even science shows us that the universe is expanding. It started, with a Big Bang. They can see that things are expanding away from each other. There's going to come a point where the gravity will stop it from expanding. It'll end. It'll stop expanding. And then slowly it'll start coming back upon itself, So even if scientists can say that the universe has a beginning and it'll eventually have an end, who knows how, according to, their calculations, hundreds of billions of years from now, it'll collapse back upon itself. So everything will be destroyed. There is no there's no evidence of a cyclical universe. And so the Bible is, supporting what science shows us, that God made it, I'm just talking about the existence of the universe, and that it'll come a time where it will end. And so the ending shows us that there is a purpose, right? Why else, would there be an end? And Jesus' return shows us that the purpose of everything of the universe, and particularly the existence of us as humans, is that if Jesus is going to return, then why is he going to return? He's going to return, there'll be an end, there'll be a judgment day, because he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. He's going to bring his own home. So who do we want to be? Do we want to be the children of God, or do we want to be expelled into to the outer darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth? So, Jesus used a lot of his parables to talk about that, right? And just before you guys showed up, I talked about the wedding parable, where the father of the groom invites all these people from the town, and then he says, "Come, the wedding feast is ready." And then they say, "Oh, I've got better things to do," and so they won't come. And so he tells the servants, "Go out in the streets and just pick up anybody and bring them all in, the poor, the lame," and the whole part of that parable was that if the Jews, who were the ones who were chosen by God, rejected Jesus when he came, the groom, and then who does Jesus invite into his kingdom? Well, he rejects the Jewish people who rejected Jesus. Instead, he invites the Gentiles in. So we're the Gentiles. We've been invited to the wedding feast. So the coming of the Lord is all about the purpose of time. That there is there'll be a termination of history, and that all is pointing to the second coming of Christ. And so in the meantime, if you look at 1 Peter talked about how God has patience. The reason why he hasn't returned yet, and he was talking about just the 30 years between Jesus' resurrection and before Peter died. He died in 67, and the Gospels weren't even written until about 60. So 30 years had gone by, and people were probably asking Peter, "Well, where's Jesus? He hasn't shown up yet." And he says, "Well, God's not slow according to your ideas. He's patient. The reason that he hasn't shown up yet is he wants more people to know about Jesus so that they can be saved." And so, this was written almost 2,000 years ago. And yet, it's still true. God is patient. He's not slow. Jesus hasn't returned because there's still a purpose. And the purpose is the church is still growing. In God's time. That's right. And if 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years in the Lord's sight, as it says in the Psalms, then only two days have gone by. It's only been 2 days since Jesus was here, right? Jesus was raised from the dead 2 days ago. And we've got, you got to at least go to a week, right? So it's got to be at least a week before, right? So maybe Jesus would be returning 5,000 more years, right? That'll be a week.
There you go.
And then the Sabbath day, right? The ultimate rest. Who knows? Maybe that's a new interpretation. So we can say that we can pinpoint Jesus' return 5,000 years from now. Because we know that that's not right. Because if you think you know, then you don't know. But we'll be dead by then anyway. So but it's funny how every generation comes up with they'll come up with ways of saying, "Well, this must be the last times."
Well, especially when you got your earthquakes, your tsunamis, and it's said right in Revelation.
It doesn't say that's the end though. It says those are the birth pains. It just shows that
right before.
That's right. So it's before the end. So all we can say is that the time is growing close, but the time isn't here. This is not the end. It's only the beginning of the end.
Well, isn't the last one like what the Antichrist is like right before?
All right. Okay.
Before Jesus comes on his cloud with the sword of,
Yeah. Well, okay. That gets into some of the pre-millennialist theology about the rapture, and just before you showed up, I talked about that. But still, there's not. I think that some of those details, obviously, some of those things haven't occurred. If you look in. Actually, 2 Thessalonians. When we get into that, he gets into the man of lawlessness, which is the Antichrist.
Right, I've seen that.
And so there'll be some more of that. Those things will also be evidences of the beginning of the end. And
so
some of those things.
Back then, they were thinking, this is,
Yeah, but those things haven't happened yet. We don't have any evidence of the real Antichrist.
No.
In John's gospel, John's letters, he talks about antichrists. So he talks about people who are against Christ.
Many people.
Yeah, so, no, but there's two different versions. Paul talks about the Antichrist, but then there's other people who are antichrists, people who are against Christ. And so we can already know who those people are, right? You know, there's the false prophets, there's the false teachers, there's all these cults around us that are claiming that they're Jesus when they're not. So ultimately, there's already a lot of antichrists. You know,
Satan worshipers.
and the word Antichrist in Greek means against Christ. So it doesn't necessarily mean devil worshippers. It just means people who are against Jesus. They're
against Jesus.
They're either claiming that they're Jesus, or they're claiming that you need to worship something else. Obviously, if you're worshiping somebody other than Jesus, then that is incited by the devil. You may not be worshiping the devil, but it's demonic to worship anything other than God. Yeah. So Paul understood that, even in his life, you can see in his writings, some of his earliest ones, he talks about the parousia, the coming of Jesus, as being, that's a Greek word that means like the second coming, right? And he talks about it as if it were imminent. In the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, it always talks about the parousia as like it's right around the corner. I mean, be ready because it's coming. If not tomorrow, maybe even today.
Be ready.
But that's because those were written early. Those are the earliest writings of the New Testament, and even between 40 and 60 AD, just that 20-year period, you see Paul's letters start to change, where he's saying, be patient. Our job is not finished yet. Sure, Jesus might come like a thief in the night, but let's do the work of an evangelist.
Yeah,
let's do the work.
He comes. Don't
That's
worry
right.
about selling your goods, selling your
That's
house.
right.
And making sure,
Yeah. And
your dog is fed. Yeah, just be ready.
Yeah, and somebody asked Martin Luther one time, if you knew that Jesus was coming tomorrow, what would you do today? And you know what he said? I'd plant an apple tree. Because that's faithful to do the work of planning for life and doing just regular things in life. Why should you change? What are you going to do? Like you said, sell your goods?
Right.
I mean, because what are you going to benefit from that? I mean, it's not going to help you.
We're not going to need this world.
You're not going to need it.
Our bed to sleep in. We don't need a shower.
Right.
We don't need any of that. We don't need to pay the gas bill.
That's right. So, just doing what we're called to do, to be faithful in our lives, to care for the people around us, to show love, really, to love God, love your neighbor. Those are the two things that we should always be doing, and it shouldn't change just because even if we were to know. But the thing is, we'll never will know, so there's no reason to change.
So just keep doing what you're doing.
That's right.
If it's God's work.
So, like I mentioned, the idea that Jesus would return as, like a thief in the night is something that Jesus himself mentioned in several places. Matthew 24, verses 43 and 44, Luke 12, 39 through 40, and Paul mentions it, Peter in 2 Peter 3:10, Revelation 3:3. I'm just giving you the verses. You don't need to look them up, because it just uses that phrase, like a thief in the night.
I marked them all anyway. I went to this page. But
Yeah.
soon my whole Bible's going to be highlighted. You know what I mean? I have different color.
Okay, so the next verse in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 3, Paul writes, while people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly, as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. So notice that, it talks about people who are talking about like the end of the world or Jesus' return is like no big deal. Peace and safety, everything's okay, right? But he says, but destruction will come on them. So we're specifically talking about the people who are ignoring the coming of Christ or the judgment day, or they don't think that there's any reason to believe that Jesus would ever do anything. Everybody will be saved. Universalism, right?
So these are the Christians that are thinking not to worry?
No, he's saying that he's saying people who may claim to be Christian but aren't, or non-believers, right? It just says people are saying peace and safety, but destruction will come on them suddenly. Now, the word destruction there, it does not mean completely wiped out, not annihilation. So, as in the Jehovah's Witness theology, that when Jesus returns, that there'll be that those who are the good Jehovah's Witnesses will make it into the new heaven, only 144,000 of them, and then the new earth will be for everybody who's good. But then you might say, well, what happens to the bad people? And their answer is that they were annihilated. So basically, if you're bad, there's no punishment. there's just annihilation. It's like you no longer, you cease to exist. But in the Bible right here, we learn that there's destruction, but not annihilation. That means destruction is a type of judgment or punishment. And we can see what Paul means by that if you turn to a verse in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9. So in the next letter, he talks a little bit more about this. So 2 Thessalonians 1, verse 9, it says, talking about evil people who have rejected God, it says, they will be punished with everlasting destruction and shut out from the presence of the Lord and from the majesty of his power on the day when he comes to be glorified in his holy people and to be marveled at among those who have believed. So Jesus' return will end in an everlasting destruction, not annihilation, but a place where they will go, which, Jesus talked about, that is the hell, which was prepared for the devil and his angels, but people who follow in the way of the devil will go there as well. So God did not make the hell for people. He made it for the devil, because he had to be thrown out of heaven. So where did he have? He had to go somewhere, and he didn't. But hell is a place that is the final place of the devil. It talks about the bottomless pit and the chasm, and the book of Revelation talks about how it would be sealed. Right now it's not sealed, so the devil is in hell, but he makes his way to earth and does his damage, right? But part of it is, is it like the devil had, like in the book of Job, had free reign of the earth to just do whatever he wanted. And he, in a lot of ways, he still has a lot of that free reign, except for the fact that when Jesus died and rose again, he conquered the power of death, so that the devil, who uses the fear of death to control people, that fear has been destroyed. Now, obviously, people who don't believe in Jesus, they're still under the control of that fear. Like, oh, I'm going to die. I might as well live my life the way I want now. So selfishness, or trying to defeat death, trying to make yourself immortal, whatever. Those are all pursuits that will not get you anywhere. But Jesus reminds us that he has a better place for us. He goes to prepare a place for us, and so those who go to hell are. I was talking about how the devil, his power has been limited after Jesus' resurrection. So it's kind of like Peter talks about how the devil is like a roaring lion who goes around seeking those whom he can devour. Now, yes, the devil can destroy or hurt people, but in a way of looking at it is after the resurrection, that it was like the devil was put on a leash or on a chain. And so if you were to go see a lion at the zoo and he's on a leash and you're like putting your hand out, as long as you don't put it closer than the leash keeps him from going, then you're safe, right? It's like the cage as well. You can wave your hand in front of the lion all you want in front of the cage. The minute you put your hand into the cage, then you're within danger, right? So the devil can only hurt those who actually get too close. So as God's people, we have the comfort of the protection of Christ over us, that the devil can't touch us, he can't harm us, he can't do anything to us unless we, approach him. So, so there's no such thing as demonic possession for God's people. It's not possible. There are some churches that get into this all spiritual warfare thing and, fighting the devil. Well, I don't know if you know anything about those groups.
If we were trying to, because Jesus took out lots of demons from a lot of people. So,
yeah, well, I know those are people who were demon possessed because they weren't believers, obviously, at the time, and Jesus cast those demons out.
Not even Mary Magdalene?
She didn't know Jesus until not until he showed up.
Oh.
Yeah. No, he's the one who cast the demons out of her.
Such a good follower of Jesus.
Well, after the demons were cast out. Yeah. She was healed, and then she became a follower. See, you can't follow Jesus. No, the Bible says that we're born spiritually dead. And a spiritually dead person, a dead body can't make a movement towards anything. I can't do anything. So not until you're resurrected through the gift of faith can you ever be a believer or follow Jesus. So first, the Holy Spirit converts you and calls you into God's kingdom, and then you can be a follower of Jesus. And so Mary Magdalene was spiritually dead until Jesus cast her demons out, and then she became a follower. And and Jesus talked about he who has been given much loves much. So she had been healed of such a tormented life that she loved Jesus even more than other people did because of that. So the devil doesn't have anything on us. He can't harm us, and we're under God's. That's right.
Like the movies say, you have no power over me.
And so as Christians, we can have that reassurance. We don't need to worry about about any demonic powers. There are demonic powers out there, but those powers usually they only have power over those people who have given them the power. In America, maybe the kind of spiritual stuff is not as much in the open. But in other countries, like, my wife coming from Brazil, she says in Brazil there's still a lot of people who they actually believe in what they call white magic. So people will dedicate their lives to a spiritual entity, which is another name for a demon, right? And then they will end up having either popularity or money or they believe that they receive some type of benefit by selling their soul to the devil.
Oh no!
And by doing this, they actually are able to do certain things. There's people who claim that they have become rich because of their dedication to this.
Yeah, but
they call it an entity.
To get rich?
Exactly.
Stepped on a lot of fingers.
That's right.
Sure.
And so they call it white magic, and it's actually pretty popular in South American countries. It's kind of shocking for us as Americans. We think, what?
Well, I had heard of this.
But it's true. Santeria?
Santeria, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and so, but that still comes out of kind of.
That's a voodoo.
Well, see, voodoo comes out of like the African influence, which again was the African influence was still pagan worship. It was the worship of demonic or deities, and the thing that I'm talking about in South America actually also came from the slave trade. So the slaves worshipped these entities, these demonic beings, and as they came to Brazil. The Brazilians, of course, 500 years ago were Catholic, and they told the slaves, that you can't do this anymore. So they baptized them, and they all became Christian. So they didn't really become Christian. What they did was they changed the names of the entities to the names of the saints. So they were going to church, and they were worshiping St. Paul, St. Peter, St. James, St. Thomas.
No.
But these names were the statues of the saints. They were actually worshiping the entities.
Oh my goodness!
And so what they did is they continued to do their pagan rituals. Right. They would do them outside the church, and like on the saint days, they would have a statue of a saint, and they'd parade him through the street. And then you'd see all the people dancing and doing the same African dances to the worship of these demons that they did back, for hundreds of years in front of the Catholic Church. And then
Catholics didn't catch on to that?
I think that they probably knew some of it, but they kind of ignored it. And then as a result, over the last 500 years in Brazil, you kind of have this. It's called syncretism. You have the Catholic Church and this pagan worship. That's kind of they kind of wink. Yeah, it's combined, and that's why Protestants in Brazil do not believe that Catholics are saved. They believe that they are going straight to hell because of the syncretism. Yeah, because you can actually see Catholic priests on like the Saint Day. You've got all these people dancing and celebrating the saint as they bring the statue to the church, and then the priest will come out on the steps of the church and he'll sprinkle his holy water on the people who are celebrating this. Really, which is just it's a African pagan ritual that has been integrated into the worship of the saint.
So do you think when he's putting the holy water, maybe he's trying to bless them?
He's blessing what they're doing and not telling them what they're doing is wrong. And this has been going on for 500 years. And so the Catholic Church just kind of looks the other way.
Did you know what the exorcisms that the Catholics can only do that they always have the
holy water, right?
The holy water. Do you think maybe
the only reason water is holy? The only reason it's holy is because the word holy means set apart. And so water used in baptism is set apart for the use of baptism. It's only holy because of its use. It doesn't have any magic powers. There's no such thing.
You don't bless it? You bless it.
No, we just use water.
Oh.
And because...
I think I'm watching too many movies.
But what you're thinking of is that's Catholic. That's the Catholic idea that you bless something and it becomes something special. And throughout the centuries, people have misused that. So in the Catholic Church, one of the reasons why they didn't give people the wafer in their hand was because people would take it and use it for magic.
Oh,
so they would put it directly into your mouth so that you would eat it, and they
still do that.
They still do that to this day because of the misuse of this idea that this is a piece of Jesus. It has a divine power, and do you know where the word hocus pocus comes from?
No.
It comes from the Latin phrase "es hocum," and it's the words for "this is my body" in Latin.
Hocus pocus means this is
no, hocus pocus is what the Latin phrase "this is my body" sounds like when you say it fast. Es hocum Deum, something like corpum, yeah. Es hocum corpus Deum, something like that. So it means this is the body. This is my body. Yeah, and so it comes from the phrase "this is my body" in Latin, and if you say it really fast, it sounds like hocus pocus. So that phrase that is used for by magicians really came out of the medieval practice of black magic that believed that as the Catholic Church taught that the body of Christ had this divine power, and then the holy water had some power, and that's why the Protestant Reformation occurred, because Luther said none of these things are biblical. There's no power in the bread except for the forgiveness of sins that Jesus offers. It's His promise that makes it powerful, not the bread itself. And so because what you're doing is you're treating it like some type of pagan ritual. Because in paganism, magic believes that if you say certain words and you use certain items, that they have power in and of themselves. And the Bible doesn't say that God can be manipulated that way. So the whole point is that magic is manipulation of spiritual things in order for your own purposes. So it's like, you're controlling the things for your own purposes, which are usually evil.
Trying to deceive.
And so God says that only He can. So anyways, finishing up verse 1 Thessalonians 5:3, where it talks about people were saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly, and as labor pains on a pregnant woman, they will not escape. So my point was that by the fact that he says destruction will come, he's saying that those who reject Jesus and on the last day, actually they will go to a place. It won't be like they're annihilated, like the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that if you're evil, then there's no bad things that'll happen to you. You'll just disappear. But here he says there will be destruction, and as we looked in 2 Thessalonians 1:9, it talks about there will be an eternal destruction. So it will be an unending, painful experience. And really, because God is everything that's good, to be away from His presence will be to experience everything that's bad. So in hell, it'll be like an itch that can never be scratched. It'll be like a hunger that'll never be satisfied. It'll be a thirst that'll never go away. Right. Eternally irritated torture. and pain and torture. Yeah. Right. And he tells us that coming of that last day, it says again, it'll come on them suddenly as labor pains. So like a thief in the night and like labor pains on a pregnant woman, these are two metaphors for when Jesus returns. Now the difference is like labor pains is not the birth, it's not the birth. So that shows us that there's still a little bit of time. So when the labor happens, you know that the birth is coming. When, like you said earlier, we see wars and famines and earthquakes, then we know that the end is coming. So Jesus will be returning. But again, how soon is relative. It depends on like the Bible says, 1,000 years is like a day. So if we have 1,000 years of earthquakes, that's still a short time in God's calendar, because He's waiting for the perfect time to return, for Jesus to come, because He wants to save as many people as possible. So Paul's emphasis in this letter is not fear, but it is encouragement. He wants us to believe. He wants us to know that Jesus loves us. And in the meantime, we have a job to do, and that job is not to just wait for Jesus' return, but it is to be prepared by living our lives, by rejecting sin, and sharing the gospel, and sharing the gospel with others, so that they also can be saved. Let me just finish with verse 4. It says, "But you, brothers, are not in darkness, so that this day should surprise you like a thief." So he's telling them, don't worry, you're not going to be surprised because you're already prepared. And so again, God has prepared us. We don't do the preparation. We don't believe in Jesus by ourselves. It's the gift of the Holy Spirit. And then he says in verse 5, "You are all sons of the light and sons of the day." Now, in Greek, when you use the word son, it actually be translated as children. Sure. But the reason why they use son is because the son is usually the one who would be the inheritor, right? So there's a connotation to the word here, son, that you don't get with the word daughter. You're the inheritor. So not only to be sons of light, but you can say the children of light or the inheritors of light. So we are given the gift that we didn't earn or deserve by God, the gift of heaven. And to be sons of the day, that means that that we're children of the day. We don't do things secretly in the night. That's Jesus talked about how evil is done at night because people get away with it. Nobody sees what they're doing. And then Paul says here, "We do not belong to the night or to the darkness. So then, let us not be like others who are asleep, but let us be alert and self-controlled." So he uses these descriptions of what the non-believer is like. He says that they're asleep, so it means they're spiritually dead, because the word to be asleep often is used as a way of talking about death. Remember, he talked about those who have fallen asleep. He meant those who have died before you. He says that Jesus won't return before they'll be raised. So people who are asleep is really to be dead in sin. And then he says, let us be alert and self-controlled. So the opposite of this is unbelievers would be people who are not alert. They're not aware of things that are going on. They don't care about things that are spiritual, and they don't have any self-control. They just allow sin to have free reign in their lives, and they don't see it as sin. They just see it as, I want to do what I want to do. So it's that selfish attitude blinds you to the fact that you're actually you're going to hell because you're living a life of evil. So Paul, he warns them, saying, don't be like those people. And really to let those people, if you know people like that, then to try to bring them back from the darkness into the light. And so next week we'll continue in the middle of this section on verse, we'll start on verse 7.